These images stand as visual records, where the veils surrounding the deaths of beloved black icons appear to be pulled back, revealing unsettling realities that Hollywood was believed to have concealed for decades. Each frame feels less like a photograph and more like evidence fragments of lives paused at the edge of their final hours. One image showing a towering civil rights leader in his final moments carries an unbearable tension, as some people claimed an unfamiliar figure seemed to linger ominously in the background. It is the kind of detail that makes the air feel heavier the longer you stare. Then there is the haunting final image of a once adored child star clinging to life amid a maze of medical machines. The room appears silent, yet the photograph echoes with an unspoken accusation, a visual indictment of alleged neglect and hidden cruelties that were never fully addressed. According to reports, these images were never meant to be public, yet once seen they cannot be forgotten. This journey through 50 final photographs promises something far more disturbing than nostalgia. It is said that each image strips away layers of mythology, leaving behind only fragile human truth. These are not moments of triumph, but of exposure, the last irreversible seconds before history closed its doors. What remains are faces caught between exhaustion and resignation, fame and isolation, light and shadow. And as each photograph pulls us deeper, one question quietly forms: who benefited from the silence that followed? Captured backstage amid the electric atmosphere of the Ebony Fashion Fair in Los Angeles in December 1964, one photograph shows Sam Cooke in conversation with Omega Sims, fresh off his triumphant 65-city tour. He appears confident, composed every inch, the king of soul standing at the absolute peak of his influence. Yet the image now feels unsettling, knowing what followed just hours later. According to official accounts, the legendary singer was found shot to death the following morning at the Hacienda Motel, a seedy establishment on South Figueroa Street in Los Angeles. The contrast between the vibrant backstage energy and the cold finality of his death remains one of the most chilling juxtapositions in music history. Some people claimed unanswered questions lingered in the aftermath, questions that were never fully resolved. Another photograph taken within the suffocating confines of a New York recording studio in March 1959 shows Billie Holiday struggling through the final sessions of her self-titled album. The image reveals a frail Lady Day, trembling hands wrapped around a glass beside the microphone. Her vacant stare and gaunt features reflect profound exhaustion, a haunting shadow of the radiant jazz icon the world once knew. Taken just 4 months before her death, the photograph feels less like documentation and more like a quiet farewell. This image would later be seen as a grim prelude. Billie Holiday passed away on July 17, 1959, at Metropolitan Hospital following complications from end-stage cirrhosis. It was said that her body gave out long before her spirit ever did. The photograph does not scream tragedy, it whispers it softly and relentlessly. A stark black and white frame captures one of the last fragile moments of Nat King Cole. His face appears gaunt, his body visibly worn down by illness, as if each step costs him something he can't afford to give. The photo shows him struggling to walk, leaning heavily into the steady support of his devoted wife, Maria Cole, outside St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. At the time, he was enduring grueling radiation treatments for terminal lung cancer therapy that, according to reports, offered more pain than hope. The image is devastating because it refuses to romanticize anything. It shows the quiet mechanics of decline, a man who once filled rooms with warmth now moving through a corridor of fluorescent light, shoulders slumped, breath measured. There is no stage here, no orchestra, no applause, only the slow, relentless countdown of a body reaching its limit. Shortly after these images were taken on February 15, 1965, Nat King Cole passed away at just 45 years old. The photograph becomes a reminder of how quickly fame can be replaced by fragility. Another frame freezes Otis Redding beside his private Beechcraft H-18 in Cleveland on December 10, 1967. He stands close to the aircraft like a man who has done this 1,000 times yet. The photo now reads like a warning in hindsight. It remains the final glimpse of the soul singer before he boarded the flight to Madison, Wisconsin, a flight that it was said never stood a chance against what waited in the sky. Tragedy struck within hours. The aircraft plunged into the icy waters of Lake Monona amid treacherous weather and thick fog. The details have been discussed for decades, but the ending remains the same. Otis Redding was gone at 26 years old. What makes it even more haunting is that he had recorded sitting on the dock of the bay just 3 days earlier, as if he somehow sensed the edge of the world approaching. The photograph, once ordinary, now feels like a final signature left behind. Then comes an image that carries an almost unbearable weight. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stands with his inner circle on the second-floor balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, on April 3, 1968. It is believed to be the last photograph of the minister taken while he was in town supporting black sanitation workers on strike. In the frame there is no dramatic pose, just quiet purpose, tired eyes, and the stillness of someone carrying history on his back. The next evening, April 4, King returned to that same balcony before heading out to dinner. A sniper's bullet struck him from across the street. Officially, James Earl Ray was identified as the shooter, but the gravity of the moment has fueled questions ever since, questions that refuse to disappear even when time tries to bury them. King died at only 39, a global symbol of peace cut down in a place that should have been temporary shelter. The photographs don't just show people. They show systems tightening around them. They show the moment before the world changes and the moment after, when the silence becomes its own kind of evidence. And as these frames pile up, another question forms beneath the surface. When the dust settled, who stood to gain from the chaos, the loss, and the unanswered shadows? One photograph captures Whitney Houston stepping out of the True Hollywood nightclub in the early morning hours of February 10, 2012. The flash of paparazzi lights freezes her mid-motion, visibly shaken hair, disheveled, her expression distant and unsettled. Earlier that night, according to reports, she had been involved in a heated confrontation at a pre-Grammy party. Security eventually escorted her away, and the cameras caught what would become her final public images, a woman once defined by vocal perfection, now appearing physically and emotionally fractured. The following afternoon, her body was discovered submerged in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Authorities later ruled her death a drowning complicated by heart disease and cocaine use. Yet the image from the night before lingers uneasily. Some people claimed it looked less like the end of a party and more like a warning no one wanted to hear. Another frame halts time inside the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem on February 21, 1965. Malcolm X stands at the podium delivering what would become his final appeal for justice. His posture is firm, his voice captured mid-thought. Only seconds after this image was taken, gunfire erupted. 3 assailants stormed the stage, firing at point-blank range. He was killed in front of his wife and children. The photograph, meant to document a speech, instead became the last visual record before chaos tore through the room. A quieter but equally devastating image shows Dinah Washington confined to a hospital bed in late 1963. Her face looks weary, fragile, marked by years of relentless pressure. Beside her sits close friend and fellow singer Brooke Benton, offering gentle care. Earlier performances had already revealed visible exhaustion, the toll of insomnia, diet pills, and constant demand. Only weeks later, Dinah Washington was found dead in her Detroit home. Her death was ruled an accidental overdose. The photograph feels less like recovery and more like a final pause. In April 2016, paparazzi captured Prince leaving a local pharmacy near his Paisley Park estate. He is dressed entirely in black, his movements guarded, his expression distant. According to reports, he had been seeking pain medication amid chronic hip pain and a private struggle with opioid dependence. Just 15 hours later, his body was discovered inside an elevator at Paisley Park. The image, released shortly before his death, now reads like a closing frame to a story he never wanted told. Then there is the final photograph of Tupac Shakur seated beside Suge Knight inside a black BMW on the night of September 7, 1996. They had just left the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Minutes later, their car was ambushed at a red light. Tupac was struck multiple times. After 6 days in critical condition, he died on September 13. The image remains suspended in time, unaware, calm, deceptively ordinary moments before violence erased the future. These photographs do not shout. They wait. They sit quietly, holding the weight of moments when systems failed protection, vanished, and silence followed. Each frame raises the same uncomfortable question: when these lives were cut short, who truly benefited from what was left unsaid? One tender family portrait preserves Donny Hathaway smiling beside his wife and 2 young daughters in early 1979. The image radiates warmth, a fleeting glimpse of domestic peace that feels almost unreal in hindsight. He looks present, engaged, grounded. Yet according to those close to him, this calm masked an exhausting internal battle. Only days later on, January 13, 1979, Hathaway's body was found on the pavement below his 15th-floor window at the Essex House Hotel in New York. He was 33 years old. It was believed that years of struggling with paranoid schizophrenia had finally pushed him beyond the edge. The photograph remains painful not because of what it shows, but because of what it hides. Another frame captures Marvin Gaye in his signature white suit during the 1983 Midnight Love Tour. His smile is wide, confident, triumphant, the look of an artist enjoying a powerful comeback fueled by the global success of sexual healing. Yet beneath the surface, family tensions and psychological strain were reportedly reaching a breaking point. Less than a year later, on April 1, 1984, Marvin Gaye was shot and killed by his own father during a heated argument inside their family home, just 1 day before his 45th birthday. The photograph becomes almost cruel, in retrospect freezing joy mere steps away from catastrophe. A heartbreaking black and white image shows Tammy Terrell at her vanity in 1970. Her body appears worn down by chemotherapy as she battles brain cancer. A friend gently helps her place a wig on her head, a quiet act of care, dignity, and survival. There is no audience, no performance, only a woman trying to hold on to herself. After 8 unsuccessful brain surgeries, Tammy Terrell passed away later that year, at just 24. The image remains one of the most intimate records of strength collapsing under relentless illness. Then comes a startling hospital photograph of Gary Coleman taken in late May 2010. The former child star lies motionless in a hospital bed at Utah Valley Regional Medical Center, surrounded by machines keeping his body alive after a severe brain hemorrhage caused by a fall. He was reportedly in a deep coma when the image was taken. The presence of his ex-wife at his side sparked public controversy, raising questions about privacy, exploitation, and consent. On May 28, 2010, life support was withdrawn. The image exposes the harsh reality of a star system that offered fame early, then abandoned him quietly. Another poignant frame shows Sidney Poitier walking slowly outside a medical building in Beverly Hills, a bandage visible on his head as he leans on the support of a loved one. His movements appear careful, deliberate. The photograph offers a rare glimpse of vulnerability from a man long associated with strength and dignity. On January 6, 2022, Poitier passed away at home at age 94. His death was attributed to heart failure and late-stage Alzheimer's disease. The image feels less like an ending and more like a final chapter written softly. These photographs don't chase shock. They document erosion of bodies, of minds, of support systems. They show how success can coexist with isolation and how legacy offers no immunity from decline. And as these lives fade frame by frame, another silence grows louder. When the lights went out, who was still watching and who had already turned away? A rare, intimate photograph shows Louis Armstrong in a quiet, weary moment, pressing a handkerchief to his brow as if trying to wipe away more than sweat. The usual wide grin is gone. What remains is a man whose body looks like it's finally negotiating with the years. Behind that single frame sits a sobering reality after decades of forcing every breath through a trumpet and giving his full lungs to the crowd. His heart and kidneys were believed to be pushed close to their limits. Not long after, on July 6, 1971, Armstrong passed away at home. The image doesn't feel like a celebrity photo. It feels like the last page of a file left open on a desk. Another frame documents Red Fox, on the set of the sitcom The Royal Family, in October 1991, just before one of the most bitterly ironic moments in American television. On October 11, while rehearsing, Fox suddenly collapsed. According to reports at first, the room didn't react with panic. Some laughed thinking he was performing his famous gag from Sanford and Son, where his character would pretend to have a heart attack. For a few seconds, comedy masked crisis. Then the truth snapped into focus under the studio lights. Fox died later that day at 68, and the photograph meant to capture work in progress became evidence of how quickly people can misread distress when they're trained to expect a performance. In Los Angeles, another image shows Michael Jackson rehearsing for his This Is It comeback at the Staples Center on June 23, 2009. He's in motion, locked into choreography, surrounded by the machinery of a return that was supposed to restore his legend. But the photograph holds a quieter subtext: exhaustion behind the intensity, a body pushing through a schedule that some people claimed was suffocating. 48 hours later, Jackson was found dead at home. His death was ruled acute drug intoxication, and the image suddenly looked less like preparation and more like a man sprinting toward a cliff, with the world cheering from the sidelines. A final rehearsal photo from 1971 shows saxophone virtuoso King Curtis absorbed in practice alongside Duane Allman for a broadcast at WPLJ. He looks focused, calm, almost protected by the music itself. Yet only weeks later, on the night of August 13, 1971, a confrontation outside his Upper West Side apartment ended in a fatal stabbing. The photograph freezes a peaceful instant before violence arrived, turning a routine session into a timestamp nobody asked for. Another frame portrays former child prodigy Frankie Lyman during a 1967 performance at the Fun City Cabaret. He stands under stage lights that no longer feel triumphant, more like harsh exposure. The image reflects a young man making what appears to be a desperate attempt to reclaim his place in music. Reports from that era described severe heroin addiction and a career collapse accelerated by turbulence, pressure, and a voice that had changed with adolescence. Only months later, shortly after being discharged from the Army for drug-related issues, Lyman was found dead of an overdose in his grandmother's Harlem apartment. The photo now reads like a last flare before darkness. A haunting hotel photograph shows Bob Marley in Munich, painfully thin, placing hope in alternative cancer treatments after the disease had spread. The contrast is almost shocking. The man who once shook stadiums now appears fragile, moving as if every step is negotiated. On May 11, 1981, Marley died in Miami after cancer reached his brain and lungs. The image doesn't ask for sympathy. It demands you acknowledge what fame can't protect you from. Then there's a vibrant shot of Christopher Wallace, the Notorious B.I.G., at a late-night party hosted by Vibe at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles on March 8, 1997. He looks alive in the way only someone in motion can look, present, social, charged by the room. Minutes after leaving the event in the early hours of March 9, he was killed in a drive-by shooting while sitting at a red light in a Chevrolet Suburban. The photograph, once just a party memory, became the last public proof that he was still here. A 1953 portrait of Charlie Parker offers a brutal close-up of physical collapse. His face carries the exhaustion of years of addiction and the weight of a body failing too soon. In March 1955, Parker, died from complications including pneumonia, a heart attack, and advanced cirrhosis. He was only 34, yet the medical examiner reportedly estimated him to be much older, a detail that turns the portrait into something colder than art. It becomes a warning note stamped into history: talent can move faster than the body that carries it. In the Bahamas, a snapshot preserves Aliyah smiling on a beach on August 25, 2001, after filming scenes for her Rock the Boat video. The light is soft, the smile effortless, the moment nearly perfect, and that's what makes it so disturbing. Only hours later, a small plane carrying Aliyah and her team crashed shortly after takeoff. Reports said the aircraft was overloaded. All 9 people on board died. At 22, she became one more legend, sealed inside a frame that looks too peaceful to be true. A still from personal footage filmed by Lisa Left Eye Lopez during a retreat in Honduras in April 2002 shows her holding the camera herself, searching for inner healing in a quiet place far from the noise. The image feels self-contained, as if she's trying to rewrite her own story. Shortly after, on April 25, 2002, the vehicle she was in rolled over in a crash. She died at 30, leaving behind footage that now plays like an unfinished confession, a journey cut off mid-sentence. These frames keep stacking like pages in a case file: art, activism, comedy, and fame pressed flat against illness, addiction, and sudden violence. And the deeper you go, the more the pattern feels less random and more systemic, a world that rewards the performance, then looks away at the collapse. When the final images surfaced, who controlled what the public was allowed to believe and who quietly benefited from the gaps left behind? A quiet summer snapshot shows Shorty Long standing near a dock along the Detroit River in 1969. The water behind him appears calm, almost indifferent, as if concealing what was about to happen. Just hours after this image was taken, the boat carrying Long and a friend capsized after being struck by the wake of a larger vessel. The river turned unforgiving without warning. On June 29, 1969, Shorty Long drowned at only 29 years old. The photograph now feels deceptive, a peaceful surface, masking how fast control can disappear. Another candid image captures trumpet prodigy Lee Morgan seated inside Slug's Saloon in New York in February 1972. He looks relaxed, unaware, immersed in the familiar comfort of music and smoke-filled air. Minutes later, during a jealous confrontation, his common-law wife, Helen Moore, shot him in the chest. Paramedics were delayed by snow, and Morgan bled to death inside the club. The frame freezes what would become his final moment of peace, transforming Slug's Saloon into a permanent crime scene in jazz history. A press photograph taken on June 12, 1963, shows Medgar Evers standing outside the NAACP headquarters in Washington, D.C., alongside a delegation of supporters. The image appears routine, official, nothing that suggests danger. Yet some later claimed the most unsettling detail is a stranger visible behind the group, his presence raising questions only after Evers was assassinated at his home later that night. Whether coincidence or something darker, the photograph has fueled speculation for decades, leaving behind a silence thick with unresolved suspicion. Another raw paparazzi image exposes David Ruffin during his final night in Philadelphia on June 1, 1991. Taken inside a drug-filled room, the photograph shows traces of excess scattered across a table, despite attempts to hide them. There is nothing glamorous here, just exhaustion, isolation, and collapse. Only hours later, Ruffin was pronounced dead from an overdose at age 50. The image reads less like scandal and more like evidence of a system that watches destruction but intervenes too late. A serene garden photograph taken at the Samarkand Hotel in London on September 17, 1970 shows Jimi Hendrix sitting quietly, unaware he was being photographed by his girlfriend. The frame feels almost gentle. Yet within 24 hours, Hendrix would be dead. According to official reports, he died from asphyxiation after ingesting sleeping pills combined with alcohol. The calmness of the image stands in brutal contrast to the violence of the end, turning serenity into something unsettling. Another stark portrait shows Easy A during his final days in early 1995. His rapid physical decline shocked fans worldwide just weeks after he publicly revealed his AIDS diagnosis. The photograph, taken shortly before or during hospitalization, stripped away the armor of hip-hop bravado and exposed vulnerability in its rawest form. On March 26, 1995, Eazy-E died from AIDS-related complications, leaving behind unanswered questions about awareness, stigma, and silence within the industry. Then comes a haunting studio image from Dayton, Ohio, dated April 25, 1999. Roger Troutman is seen inside his private recording space, surrounded by equipment that once amplified his genius. Hours later, he was shot and killed by his own brother and manager, following a financial dispute. The violence didn't stop there. His brother later took his own life. The photograph becomes more than documentation. It marks the exact point before family business and blood collided. A dim nightclub photograph from 1969 captures Wynonie Harris slumped under stage lights, his body visibly worn down. Years of alcohol and tobacco had taken their toll. The image offers no illusion of recovery. Harris later died of esophageal cancer at age 53, his decline unfolding far from the spotlight that once celebrated him. Another devastating frame shows Jackie Wilson mid-performance at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, on September 29, 1975. While singing Lonely Teardrops, he collapsed from a massive heart attack. The audience initially applauded, believing it was choreography. Instead, Wilson fell into a coma that lasted 8 years until his death in 1984. The image captures the moment, performance blurred fatally with reality. A rare studio portrait from 1937 shows Robert Johnson, one of only 2 known photographs of the blues pioneer. A year later, he was dead at 27, reportedly poisoned by a jealous husband. The image feels mythic, now less evidence, more legend, but its existence anchors the story in something painfully real. These photographs continue to pile up like sealed folders, reopened too late. Accidents, addictions, violence, illness, different endings, same silence. Each frame forces the same uneasy reflection: were these tragedies inevitable or simply convenient? And when the stories ended, who was left holding the narrative? A late 1990s image shows Mabel King in a period of severe decline, relying on oxygen tubes to breathe. The photo is difficult to look at for long, not because it is graphic, but because it reveals the cost of a body fighting a war it can't win. Years of diabetes complications reportedly stripped away her strength piece by piece, including the immense loss of both legs to amputation. After a long battle, Mabel King died in Los Angeles on November 18, 1999, at 66. The photograph turns medical reality into a cold, undeniable receipt. Another haunting photograph functions like an indictment of Mary Wells' final hours. Once celebrated as a shining Motown star, she is seen hunched on a street corner, her body marked by illness and hardship. According to reports, she was battling laryngeal cancer, while also facing poverty so severe she lacked health insurance. Mary Wells died on July 26, 1992, at 49, said to be in financial ruin, surviving in part on donations from friends. The image doesn't just document decline, it forces a question about how an industry can profit from a voice, then abandon the person. A vibrant studio photograph taken on July 8, 2004, shows Rick James working on music, seemingly alive inside the place that always made sense to him, a recording room. He appears focused, present, like a man still chasing sound. Less than a month later, on August 6, 2004, he was found dead at his Los Angeles home. His death was attributed to heart and pulmonary failure, reportedly tied to long-term health problems, including diabetes, post-stroke complications, and an enlarged heart. The contrast between the creative energy of the image and the final outcome makes the room feel haunted. A black-and-white portrait taken in New York on February 3, 1937, captures the powerful spirit of the Empress of the Blues, Bessie Smith. The photo radiates confidence and revival, a woman preparing to reclaim her place after hard years. Yet 7 months later, on September 26, 1937, she died in a car accident on Highway 61 in Mississippi. The photograph reads like a cruel prophecy, a revival planned, a future imagined then abruptly erased. Another stage image from 1984 shows Esther Phillips performing in what would become one of her final appearances. Behind the microphone, she appears steady, but some reports suggested she was living under the long shadow of heroin addiction. Only months after that performance, on August 7, 1984, Phillips died, at 48, from severe liver and kidney failure believed to be linked to years of substance abuse. The photograph doesn't show collapse, it shows endurance, which somehow makes the ending hit harder. A bright, energetic photo from the Blue Note in New York on June 30, 1995 captures Phyllis Hyman delivering a stunning performance after stepping in last minute for an ill Roberta Flack. The image preserves brilliance, not breakdown, the kind of talent that fills a room and makes the future feel certain. But hours after that night, Hyman was found unconscious in her apartment, only a week before her 46th birthday. According to reports, she had lived with bipolar disorder and deep psychological pain, a private struggle masked by glamour. The photograph becomes the last mask, a smiling surface stretched over an inner storm. Another painful image shows actor Howard Rollins during his final days, appearing almost unrecognizable inside a private nightclub. It was said that he attempted to conceal his identity behind flamboyant clothing and makeup, as if hiding from the world and from himself at the same time. Reports claimed he was struggling with addiction and complications related to AIDS. He died on December 8, 1996, in a New York hospital at 46. The photograph doesn't just capture a man in costume, it captures someone disappearing in plain sight. A stage photograph from Tokyo's Budokan Arena on April 17, 1996, shows Bernard Edwards performing with determination, even as illness reportedly tore through his body. Despite pleas from Nile Rodgers to cancel, he insisted on finishing the set. Witnesses later recalled him leaving the stage saying he was fine and only needed rest. Hours later, he was found dead in his hotel room from acute pneumonia. The image freezes a final act of defiance, an artist refusing to surrender until the moment his body did it for him. Then there is a 1975 promotional portrait of Florence Ballard, once the heart of the Supremes, making a final attempt to revive her career. The picture shows the visible wear of alcoholism and the quiet grief of a fallen star. Less than a year later, in February 1976, she died suddenly of a heart attack at 32, reportedly living in poverty. The photograph becomes the last public trace of someone who once stood at the center of a cultural storm, only to be left alone when the music moved on. These images don't just tell individual stories. They sketch a pattern, talent celebrated then left to unravel behind closed doors. Illness, addiction, financial ruin, stigma, different names, same machinery. And as each frame locks in place, one final thought keeps returning: when these lives faded, who controlled what was remembered and who quietly benefited from what was forgotten? A grim paparazzi photograph captures Dorothy Dandridge in what appears to be the desperate final stretch of her life. She sits in a small bar posture, slightly folded inward, as if trying to make herself smaller than the room around her. The glamour that once defined her has thinned into something brittle. According to reports, her career had collapsed under rejection, financial exploitation, and a kind of isolation that success couldn't cure. The most disturbing part isn't what the photo shows, it's what it implies: a star left to negotiate survival alone. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge was found dead in her home. Officially, her death was ruled an overdose involving antidepressants. Yet the photograph remains a silent question mark. Some people claim the tragedy looked less like a sudden end and more like a slow erasure that had been unfolding in public for years, disguised as bad luck, disguised as personal problems, disguised as anything except the system that chewed her up. Another image shows Vesta Williams at one of her last public appearances in 2011. She looks composed, polished, almost untouched by the weight she was believed to be carrying. But behind